This week on the podcast, I'm talking about the second installment in a fantasy series. It's got 2 children and multiple worlds and witches and demons and a man in a hot air balloon. If you haven't guessed it by now, it is Philip Pullman's His Dark Materials Book 2, The Subtle Knife. So if that's something you're interested in, hang around and listen to a novel review. Hello and welcome to the Literature Podcast, a novel review. My name is Seamus, your host, and together we will discuss, dissect, and explore the wonderful world of literature. And the wonderful world of literature is a vast and dense jungle. So let's start making our way through, one book at a time. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of a novel review, a book podcast. My name is Seamus, I'm the host, and every week we do the exact same thing. We talk about a different book. It's just a different book every week that we actually talk about. And this week is no different, so that's probably a relief to some of you. If you're a repeat customer, thank you so much for coming back. I really do appreciate it. And if this is your first time, like I said, we do what it says on the tin. We talk about a different book every week. And this week we're doing Philip Pullman's The Subtle Knife, His Dark Materials Volume 2. It's a bit of a shorter book than the first one, and it's a bit shorter than the third one, which is just here, but no less good. But before we get into that, we're actually going to talk about our mantelpiece moments, something to highlight from the week past. And this past week, as it's been, I sort of have been reflecting on them past few weeks. It's mostly been about new books that I've purchased, and this week is no different in that regard as well. Normally I try to do something different in terms of I go to a gallery or something, I don't know, do something a bit different, but just recently it's mostly been purchasing books, which is still fun. You know, this is a book podcast. If it was not a book podcast, you'd probably call it a problem or an issue. Luckily, it's not an issue. This is a book podcast. So, bought 2 books. I was in Paris over the weekend, last weekend, and went to the lovely Shakespeare & Company. Went back there because 1, I love the bookshop and I love going there when I'm in Paris, but 2, last time I was in Paris, I actually bookmarked this book to purchase. I didn't buy this one last time because it was quite big, and I bought a couple other books that I saw and thought were probably more appropriate to buy while in Paris. But this one, it was still there. I mean, a different book, of course. But it was Cormack McCarthy's The Border Trilogy. So All the Pretty Horses, The Crossing, and Cities of the Plain, all in one lovely Everyman's Library edition, hardcover. Beautiful, beautiful pages, beautiful book itself. You know, the dust cover is really nice, but of course, the book itself is also really, really nice. You, of course, get the Shakespeare & Company stamp at the front, which is also very cool. But no, I really wanted that because, Cormac McCarthy is one of my favorite authors. And I always want to get like nice editions of my favorite authors. So that was a really good one. I saw it last time and I thought, I'd like to get that. But I didn't, and found myself back there again. So I bought it not again, but bought it for the first time. Looking forward to getting into that. Haven't read McCarthy in a while. Haven't read McCarthy since he passed away, I don't think, actually, which is sad, very sad, because he was an absolutely phenomenal writer. If you've never read anything from Cormac McCarthy, I would thoroughly recommend it. He is just an incredible writer. One of the best writers, I'd say. He'd probably be up there in my top 3 best writers for the 20th century, and I'm not going to even say of all time. That would require a bit more brain power than I'm willing to dish out right now. So I bought that. That was very cool. And then I was looking for a bit of poetry. Allen Ginsburg, Howl, Kaddish, and Other Poems. So just kind of like a collection of poems by Allen Ginsburg. It was, just kind of looking for some poetry, and it just sort of caught me at the right moment. Really keen. I love getting not the nicest copies for poetry like this. You know, it's not a bad book at all, but it's not one that you're going to care too much because I like to go to war with poems, like to do a bit of scribbling, underlining, drawing, highlighting, and all the rest. So really looking forward to getting into that as well. That's going to be a good bit of fun, I think. So that was my mantelpiece moment this week. Bit of housekeeping. If you would like to like and subscribe, I would really appreciate that. It's fantastic when I see the 5-star reviews and another subscriber on YouTube. It's it sort of shows that people are actually listening. That's the main thing. But it helps other people find the show as well, and that's sort of a really nice thing as well. So if you would like to like and subscribe, that would be really amazing. It would be incredible. Leave a 5-star review as well. That would also be fantastic. But as always, it's a free podcast, so please just sit back and enjoy the show. Okay, on to the main body of work for today. Philip Pullman's The Subtle Knife, Volume 2 in his Dark Materials. This is a really fun book. I came into it with a few questions and concerns, mostly because at the end of Northern Lights, I wasn't completely satisfied. And I wasn't completely satisfied in a bad way that I was prepared to stop reading the book or was thinking of stopping reading the trilogy, but just in a way that I was really wondering how this book was going to come out and how it was going to sort of address a few issues I had, a few questions and concerns. And I think it did a fine job. I think it did a really nice job. Like, I'm definitely enjoying the story a lot more now. A second book, of course, is, I think, universally loved or hated for pretty much the same reason. And that reason is you don't have to do anything really in a second book. You don't technically have to introduce anything new. And you also don't have to wrap anything up. You can just literally have chaos from beginning to end and no one can do anything. That's probably a bit harsh. But obviously, a second book, it doesn't have to have a solid ending. And a lot of these trilogy series, they're not meant to be read in isolation like they are presented in these book forms. It is literally a beginning, middle, and end, and they are one story. And so it's like taking a piece of a story out and being sort of like, ooh, that felt, a bit out of place, or I didn't get any resolution from this book. Nothing new happened. Nothing new was introduced. It didn't feel like the story progressed. And it's a common sort of, I guess, concern people have with middle books, second books, is that, it feels like the story doesn't progress in a really interesting way. And I've got to admit, I kind of agree with this book because I'm thinking about how I'm going to sum it up in a few seconds with my very short overview. And even now I'm thinking I don't really know what happened in this book. But that being said, I'm not too fussed. I thought it was a lot of fun reading and a lot does happen. But in terms of like understanding progression of the story, not a lot happens. So it was a lot of fun. I think I've got to jump to a very short overview now, which I'm now understanding is going to be quite difficult to sum up. But basically, we're not back with Lyra in this book. We actually open with a new character called Will. He comes from our world. So he is in planet Earth and he stumbles upon a portal to another world, which is kind of the middle world. It's called Sitagazi or Sitagazi, depending on your pronunciation. And Lyra at the end of Northern Lights has left her world, which is very similar to our world, but she has then transported herself to a new world, which also happens to be this Sitagazi, Woozy Wazi, fairy dust world. They meet up and then they start to sort of form this bond together and sort of try to understand what's actually going on, how they got to this respective middle world that they're both in. Lyra's, of course, trying to understand what dust is and her place and position in this overarching story of what's going on, wondering what her father, Lord Asriel's up to, trying to avoid Mrs. Coulter and all that sort of drama that's been going on. And Will, on the other hand, is, well, he's accidentally sort of on purpose killed someone as a young boy. I think he's 12 to 14 years old, and so he's running from them. But then he's also trying to find his father that has been missing for a number of years. And then it becomes this kind of like really interesting story about sort of stuff happening. And it's, like I said, it doesn't really answer many of the questions I had. It does answer a few questions. It doesn't answer all questions, but we can't judge a middle book for that because that is not the job of the second book. That is the job of the third book to resolve everything. So where I sit right now, we're jumping ahead a bit, but where I sit right now is I think it was a really fun book. I have a lot of questions and I do look at the final book and think you've got a lot of heavy lifting to do because there's a lot of questions I need answered and I hope they're not rushed. It is a much bigger book, but we'll get there. We'll get there in a few weeks. Right now, let's talk about this book. So the introduction of Will Parry is kind of like the main, I guess, difference in this book. It's not the main difference. I shouldn't say that because there's an introduction of two further worlds that we're now aware of, Sitagazi and, of course, our world. But I think the introduction of Will was a really timely and important one because he's human by our standards in that he doesn't have a demon. And when he meets Lyra, he has all these questions that then get answered because Lyra, why wouldn't she answer them? She's got no reason to hide them. And what that does is, for at least me as the reader, it answered a lot of questions that I had as a person. So I thought the introduction of a human character, or an earthly character, I should say, was actually really timely in that it actually kind of ticked off a few easy questions that I had. So it sort of settled me a bit quite early in the story. And yeah, I guess kind of settled me and subdued me a lot, that I could then go on, and even though there was other things I didn't know about this book, that I don't know about the story, I was kind of like abated for a bit and quite happy to just progress in this kind of like blissful state of, I don't know what's going on. That's kind of my main, I guess, concern for this book, is being, I guess, technically 2/3 in and still not technically really understanding what's going on. I think is eating away at me a little bit. And I guess it's that kind of like nervous eating away where I'm like, again, the third book has a lot of heavy lifting to do. I have no idea what his dark materials are. I have only just started to grasp an understanding of what is actually going on in the story. It seems to be this all-out war against a higher power, or war against God. It seems to be quite anti-religious, which is, and I read this, it's been banned in quite a few places, or it was banned in quite a few places for being anti-religious, this story. So I found that quite interesting. And that kind of brings me to another point in, I guess it's not something I've got a concern with, but it's kind of like, it's interesting to consider. I don't really know who this book is written for. It feels like, and I don't think this is too disrespectful to say, but it feels like it's written for a sort of young adult audience. It feels like it's written with them kind of in mind. It's got that sort of writing style. The fantasy world doesn't feel, I guess, as developed and structured as something like a Tolkien or an Erickson or something like that. And I mean, maybe that's too harsh a thing to say, given that they're, some of the best fantasy writers. But it just feels that sort of little bit more childish. And I don't mean that in a bad way at all, because I mean, young adult fantasy is, it's all kinds of fun. I mean, Howl's Moving Castle, I did an episode on that. That was a wicked book. So I don't mean that in any way to be like derogatory at all. But then I think about and consider some of the storylines and overall meaning that's being threaded into these stories. And it's quite anti-religious, and it's an incredibly philosophical story, metaphysical. There's, a subtle understanding of physics wouldn't go astray in this story, because we are transporting ourselves through worlds. And so I'm kind of like, these are some big topics that I'm not sure, young adults are going to be able to grasp. So I am kind of confused as to who this is actually being written for, because as a 30-year-old trying to sympathize and understand younger characters, a 12-year-old girl and a 12 to 14-year-old boy, it is more difficult to, I guess, connect with them on a personal level, because that time in my life is quite a way ago. And I was talking to a friend, and he said he read them when he was like 15, and he absolutely loved them because he, of course, felt like really connected to the characters. But then, of course, I then said, what did you think of these, larger aspects of the story, the religious aspect, the philosophical aspect, the pure physics of the novel? And he said, yeah, like a lot of that was actually brushed straight over my head. It was just kind of like this wicked fantasy adventure story. So I am kind of confused as to who this story is written for. I guess the wonderful thing is that it's written then for everyone, because he, as a young 15-year-old, my friend as a 15-year-old, didn't feel like, because he didn't understand sort of the overall mechanics of the story, that he felt something was detracted from the story in that sense. And I guess my only criticism is that I don't feel as connected to these characters, because, being 12 is 18 years ago, which is, a solid time away ago. So that's sort of my only criticism at this stage, is sort of understanding the balance of this novel. Is it a young adult fiction fantasy novel, or is it meant to be written for a later audience? Some of the things I loved in this book is, I think I finally understand what the demons are, what a person's demon is. So as I spoke about, Pantalaimon is a demon, he's Lyra's demon, and I think what at least what I understand them to be is it's the kind of soul of the person, and when they're cut away or they're sucked away, the soul is removed from an individual. And I found that really interesting. I sort of likened it to Harry Potter and the Dementors. The Dementors can suck the soul away, and all you're left with is this lifeless person that's still alive, but they're just not there. And that's the role of the demon. The demon is kind of like the soul of the character. And I also really loved, I sort of didn't pick up on it in the first book as much, but I picked up on it in this second book, is that a demon can shapeshift, I guess, for lack of a better word, up until I think it's, you go through puberty. And the demon can shapeshift into any other animal, I think. There might be some limitations on that. But if Lyra is under attack, Pantalaimon can change into a great big jungle cat or something like that, something scary. And if Pantalaimon gets scared or something like that, he can retreat and become a mouse and hide in Lyra's breast pocket or something like that. And so it's kind of like this cool where he can sort of change himself a lot. But as you grow up and go through puberty, your demon actually gets stuck in one shape. And I found that really interesting because it's kind of like, this might sound depressing at the start, and I don't think it is depressing depending on how you look at it, but it's kind of like how when we're young as people, we think we can do anything. We want to be everything. Everything's accessible. The world is ahead of us. Everything is possible. And we grow up with this kind of like fantastical sense of, yes, I can do anything I want. And then day by day, you grow older, and that turns out to not be the case. And I think that can be, depressing in the sense that it could be you're beaten down by life day by day, and you just get, honed into this 9-to-5 worker that just sort of, plugs in and plugs out kind of thing. Or I prefer to look at it in the positive sense of, you grow up and you understand that no, you actually can't do everything, and you're actually not good at everything, and you want to sort of focus your attention to things that you're actually good at and focus more on them, so you get sort of more directed in how you want to live your life. So I really enjoyed that because I think I understand the demons a bit more. I think another thing I didn't quite enjoy about this story was I actually really enjoyed spending time with Lyra. I thought she was a cool main character. But then with the introduction of Will, it felt like Lyra actually really took the back seat in this book, which again is something that annoyed me but doesn't completely, make me hate the book. Like I said, I did quite enjoy the book, but I think the introduction of Will was quite timely, but it was just sad to see sort of Lyra take that back seat. But I sort of get it in that Lyra got the first book, Will kind of gets the second book, and now hopefully there'll be like a nice even balance of them together in the third book. That's what I'm really looking forward to. And then I've sort of realized that Lyra got the allethometer in the first book, which is the truth-telling device, where she can sort of ask it any question and it tells her the honest answer. And in this book, Will actually got this cool thing, the subtle knife it's called, which is where the book gets its title from. And it's this knife that if you, are really subtle with it and are really careful with it, you can actually cut into, I guess it's the atoms of the world, the anatomical bodies, the atoms of the world, and you can actually slice down through our world and create a portal into another world anywhere in the world. And that's what I mean about kind of like this, you want sort of like a working knowledge of physics to understand, because even now as I'm trying to explain it, I don't understand what I'm saying, but he's got a knife that can kind of cut through the atoms of our world into a parallel universe. So yeah, like as a child, you could obviously just be like, oh, he's got a knife that can cut through worlds. That's incredibly sick. And then as an adult, I'm like, oh, it's kind of interesting. Don't really understand it. So yeah, that's kind of my thoughts in that Will definitely shines a lot brighter in this book, and I didn't mind that because I found him quite an interesting character. What I did mind was Lyra taking the backseat a lot because I found her quite interesting. She seemed to lose. It felt like she lost a lot of agency in this book, and she took the backseat almost too much and lost some of her wild confidence that she has in the first book. But again, this could just be purely because she's now in a new world, and that would be frightening as hell. Like I said, she still doesn't really understand her part in the overarching story. So it's kind of hard for her to continually have this like outrageous arrogance that makes her absolutely lovable, because it must start to eat away at you eventually, being like just in another world completely technically alone. So I don't know. I'm still uncertain about this series, but I'm holding out high hopes for this third book. I'm looking forward to it. I definitely enjoyed this book a lot more than the first one, purely because I felt like I'm more into the story now and I can understand the story more. I still have no idea what dust is or what that actually means. They're sort of described as elemental particles that are all around us. I have, I already made a reference to Harry Potter. Now I make a reference to Star Wars in the Force. I think it's kind of like the Force in that it's just all around us and it's there, and some people have the ability to tap into it in certain ways, but I don't know. Hopefully I'm going to get some, solid answers in this third book. Like I said, a lot of heavy lifting. I don't know what his dark materials are yet. The subtle knife, there's different worlds. Lyra's got an allothomina. I mean, there's so much going on. It's absolutely fantastic. I think the final thing I'll say about this book is that there's a few side characters from the first book that actually get their own chapters throughout this story. And I thought that was really, really nice. There's Lee Scoresby, he's like a pilot, but he flies balloons, which is just incredible amount of fun. And some of the witches also get storylines as well. And I really like that sort of widening into this wider landscape of stories. And they have really interesting storylines, sort of side characters getting these little side missions going on. And I really actually enjoyed them almost probably the most. I really enjoyed Lee's chapters and the witches chapters as well. So there's a whole lot going on in this book. And it was, I think, a lot better than the first one, mostly, as I said, because the story is really, really going. It ends, like I said, there's no real ending. There's no resolution, but that's okay. We absolutely love that because that's the job of the third book. So I'm going to rate this one, I think I'm going to rate this a 3.9 out of 5. Okay, so what am I reading this week? This week, normally I would say The Amber Spyglass, the third book in the series, because that's traditionally how I've done these sort of what are my readings, is I try to always have started reading the next book as I speak about the previous book. But I'm specifically saving this because it is a big boy, over 500 pages, because in a few weeks I am going back to Australia for a few weeks for a friend's wedding. And it is traditionally from London to Sydney, one of the longer flights on offer. You know, it's nearly 24 hours. So there's no better time to sort of sink your teeth into a really, really big book when there's nothing else to do. And I'm excited because, like I said, there's been a lot of questions raised in the first two books. There's a lot of story going on that I think still hasn't been communicated perfectly. I mean, like I said in the first one, some of the characters, I don't even know what their intentions are, if their intentions are good. I don't know if Lord Asriel at this stage is a force for good or a force for evil. He's on a quest to destroy God or the higher power. And, you know, at this stage, I don't know what that's going to look like. I don't know what form it's going to take. And I guess that sort of makes me excited for this third book because it feels like we've now done the heavy lifting in book 1 and 2, and it's time to sort of cash in almost in this third book. At least I'm hoping it's going to be that way. But I guess it's a story that, like I said, you know, it's written as youth fiction, and my friend really enjoyed it as a young adult himself and had a lot of fun as this really kind of like just this big adventure quest of these kids going on this, you know, otherworldly adventure. But I think reading it as an adult, I'm really looking forward to seeing what's going to happen in terms of who's good and who's bad and who actually wins this and what kind of victory that, you know, what kind of form that victory actually takes. So I'm looking forward to it. I'm really looking forward to understanding what Lyra's position in this entire story is, Lyra and Will's position in this story is. So that should be good. The Amber Spyglass is obviously going to play a part because the subtle knife played a part in the story. I'm assuming that is some kind of new technological piece, kind of like the knife that has some pretty cool capabilities. So yeah, that's what I'm going to be reading. I'm going to start it just before I get on the plane so that I'm kind of like 50 pages in as I board the plane, to then spend 24 hours sort of sinking my teeth in. I'll probably have to try sleep in between there. But yes, that's what I'm looking forward to. That's what is coming up. That will be out the first week of December, so stay tuned for that. I'm keen. If you have listened this far, please consider hitting those 5 stars or the duck in the corner and subscribing. Also, feel free to head along to the website and support the pod in other ways. But as always, if you've come this far, thank you for your attention. So today, to take us away, I've got a quote. Friend sent this. They're in a bookshop. They took a picture of a quote on the wall, and that's the quote to end the episode today. So it is: I have lived 1,000 lives. I have loved 1,000 loves. I've walked on distant worlds and seen the end of time. Because I read.